Well, today with us in the studio is a friend of 100 Huntley Street, Dr. Andrew Blackwood. Welcome again.
Thanks, Mike.
We're so glad you're here. Last week was an amazing conversation. I enjoyed it so much. Today, we're going to dive into a heavy subject, and you're a family coach and counselor, but many of us, all of us, myself included, we need to be coached in the whole area of forgiveness and reconciliation. And Andrew, when I heard I was doing the conversation with you, I was traveling with my wife. We were actually talking about what is the difference between forgiveness and reconciliation. So jump in, and you can solve that question for us.
Well, you know, there are several differences, but we'll focus on the key ones today. I've been doing some reading and writing, getting ready to work on this book about apologies, and the connections between the two helped me to really discover some things.
Apologies.
Yeah.
What a great name for a book.
I'm telling you, it's changing the way that I see things. One of the big differences between forgiveness and reconciliation is forgiveness requires one.
Okay, I can hear that.
You only need one person to forgive. You don't need to agree on the issue, you don't need to agree on the perspectives. It's just an opportunity for you to do it. And when we think that reconciliation is attached to that, sometimes that can be the barrier to forgiving.
So it's hard to move from point A to point B because we think we got to do it all in one big
Exactly.
jump.
Some people think they're the same, so they think they're obligated to not only forgive, but to be reconciled.
So when Jesus calls us to forgive, that's the starting point, right? To be right with Him, to keep that relationship with Him, I need to choose to forgive.
It is a choice. And it's a difficult choice to make for some, for many reasons, depending on the offense, depending on the number of offenses, and so that might look different for many people. However, the process of reconciliation actually looks pretty similar for most people, and that requires two people.
Okay.
How can we walk unless we agree, right?
So let's back up for a second. Go back to the forgiveness part. Talk to us about forgiveness and forgetting. Do I have to forget? Because then I'll never get to the reconciliation. Just a couple quick thoughts on that.
You know, I don't think you have to forget. I think sometimes it's impossible to forget. However, we can still remember and still move forward.
So I can remember and move forward.
Yeah, you can remember and forgive. And I think that's the difference between reconciliation and forgiveness. I think we need to remember in order to reconcile.
Okay, explain that one. Okay, I got to remember in order to reconcile.
Yeah, because in order to be reconciled, we need to agree about where we're going. Some people think that because we're reunited, we've reconciled, but there's a big difference.
Don't you think that when we want to reconcile with people within ourselves, what we're really hoping initially is that they're going to own what we think they did to us?
Most people do, and most people assume once we do that forgiveness part, then everybody's on the same page, but there's no guarantee that the person is aware of what your expectations are, what your hopes are, and have they committed to that. And if you haven't gone through that process, what's the likelihood that the same thing might occur? It's pretty high.
So should I lay out my expectations when I sit down with someone and talk about reconciliation?
Definitely.
Can I do that on my own, or do I need a mediator?
Well, it depends on the scenario, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the topic of forgiveness, I think that's a first step, because that will give us indications about our readiness as well as the other person's for a reconciliation.
So I do the forgiveness within my own self. Is that what you're saying?
I think it starts there. And then depending on the situation, it may involve a conversation with the other person, it might not. And that's the beauty of forgiveness. The other person doesn't need to be present, they don't even need to be alive.
Okay, so then you're talking about offenses that have been done way in the past, and explain that. How do we work through that if they're not alive?
Well, I think a lot of the things is the reality that we carry things with us and how we carry things. We talked about remembering, but how do we remember things? And when we work through that process, and I've helped a lot of people work through the process, we really want to think about the things that we've lost, right? We want to think about the impact that we've endured, and that will help us to be able to say, okay, this is actually what I am forgiving.
When you see reconciliation happen, describe a perfect scenario.
Perfect scenario. I was working with a father and daughter, and it was, It was a wonderful process for me, and this comes back to the book that I'm working on. It helped to bridge forgiveness to reconciliation with an apology, because we worked through it to recognize what the offense or offenses were. We talked about listening last week, but that was involved in it as well. They heard either side of the story, but they actually heard, they actually listened, and we incorporated that into the apology. And then we were able to say, okay, well, from this point forward, this is how we're going to move forward. And it was a beautiful experience for all three of us.
So they heard each other well enough to be able to articulate what the other person needed to hear.
Yeah.
To close the wound.
Right.
And the wound can be huge, isn't it?
Definitely.
You're writing a book on apologies. When's it going to be out?
Well, I hope we'll be out in a couple months.
Well, I hope you'll come back and talk to us about that. And don't apologize to let us know when it comes out.
I look forward to it.
And I'm working on the listening techniques from last week and the forgiveness and reconciliation. Thank you, because with God, all things really are possible. Isn't that true?
I believe that.
And I want to say there's hope for your relationship today. Thank you, Andrew, for being here.
Thanks for
God
having
bless
me.
you in this ministry of forgiveness and reconciliation as you guide people in this journey.